Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March online meeting for both the Denver Java Users Group and the Boulder Java Users Group. I'm Greg Ostrovich. I'll be your host tonight. And I have a few thank yous that we'll do before we'll bring up our speaker. One of the things is if you have a talk topic, please reach out to us and let us know, either through the Meetup site or email Matt Rabel or myself. We're always looking for content and for speakers. So one of the housekeeping announcements that we used to do when we're in person is I would point out the restrooms, and now hopefully you can find them wherever you're watching this remotely. One of our sponsors is Tech Systems. They sponsor food, and we appreciate their support. As always, online, tonight's dinner is sponsored by whatever's in your pantry or your fridge or whatever Uber Eats brought you. Our contact for Tech Systems is Courtney Elterman, and it has her contact information on the slide. Please reach out to them if you're looking for hiring needs or for staffing needs. We appreciate our sponsors, and when you support them, they love to support us. Another sponsor is JFrog. They've been doing some really great giveaways. Mike Azuedo handles all that stuff, and he'll put the QR code in the chat for that if there's a QR code for the giveaway. Another sponsor is Apex Systems. They were usually our beer sponsor, and that was Braden Collip. Tonight's liquid refreshment, as is the food, is sponsored by whatever's in your fridge or your beer fridge or on tap or in your wine cellar. Another sponsor is Develop Intelligence. They give away a plural site, I think, every other month. Ace Van Wansiel is one of our contacts, as well as Bob Clary. They're always looking for staff to hire for technical instructors, various technologies. They include Java, Golang, JavaScript, React, DevOps tools like Kubernetes and Docker, and many others. Reach out to them if you have training needs for your organization, or if you're interested in working for them as a trainer. And their contact email is at the bottom for Bob Clary. Another sponsor is Amazon. We would usually give away like Echo Dots and other technology. Please reach out to them. On the slide deck, it has the contact information, or it should. They hire full stack, so all sorts of needs. Another sponsor is Okta. They sponsor the Meetup site and these online meetings. Matt Rabel, we appreciate you doing all that for them. Reach out to them if you have security needs and things like that. They have some different like OAuth, some training, and some tool sets you can use. If I describe that wrong, Matt, feel free to correct me when you come back up. Another sponsor is NextGen. Our contact for that is Dana Estlund. They are a consulting company, and they specialize in federal government contracts. Reach out to them at nextgeninc.com. Another sponsor is Agile Learner. That's Venkat Subramanian's company. They have a subscription to Agile Learner that we give away. They were ramping up to do a conference, and then COVID hit, so I'm sure they'll reschedule that. And there was a ton of amazing speakers for that conference. Another sponsor that's been our sponsor for quite a number of years is JetBrains. And we give away a couple of free IDEs, and we thank them for that. And it doesn't have to be just IntelliJ. It can be the IDE that encompasses more than that. So it can support Ruby. I think it's RubyMine used to be the individual offering, for example, and .NET, as well as Java, Python, and others. There should be a link for the door prizes in the chat. Mike will share that. I also want to give a thank you for this. All I do is get up and talk. A lot of the people help out behind the scenes, and I want to recognize Matt Rabel, who handles our speakers, the locations, when we're meeting in person, does the broadcast, and we really appreciate that. Mike Zuedo does the door prizes and runs the web broadcast. Sometimes when Matt is, for example, in Cabo, as he was previously. And Zeddy Chinfang does a lot of the operational stuff, sends out announcements, and gets information out to the JUG. With that, I'm going to bring up the Boulder Java Users Group person. Chris Woyna runs the BJUG, and he has some thank yous as well.
Hi, thanks, Greg. So we have many of the same great, wonderful sponsors as the Denver Java Users Group. Tech Systems, America's foremost technical recruiter, and we work with James Corboy They're great to just check in, find out what's going on, what needs are, what salaries look like, whether you're looking to hire or you're looking to score another position. We normally meet at Rule 4 Cybersecurity and Emerging Technologies. They were last year's Colorado Technology Association Award winner, and amazingly, they're this year's one of the best places to work from Outside Magazine. No fluff, just stuff. Jay Zimmerman, world-class conferences and training. Again, Venkat Subramaniam, he's trying to get a conference series going also, and he also has the Agile Developer website. IntelliJ, JetBrains, O'Reilly Books. I have at least one license for JetBrains IntelliJ and also for Agile Developer. So go to the Boulder Java Users Group website and meetup site and contact me through that, and it's first come, first serve. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Chris. And so with that, just let me tell you a little bit about tonight's presentation. Billy Korando is going to be talking about Java 18. His top title is To Java 18 and Beyond. So Java 17 has come and gone, but development on Java continues on. What has changed since Java 11 and what changes are being added in Java 18 and beyond, come find out. In this presentation, we will look at some of the key changes that have been added to Java post version 8. The large changes, the module system and records quality of life improvements, var, text blocks, pattern matching, and the many performances and runtime improvements. We'll finish the presentation with a brief look ahead to some of the changes that will be coming to Java in the near future and why Java's future is bright. So a little bit about Billy. Billy is a Java developer advocate with the Java Platform Group at Oracle. With over a decade of experience in Java, Billy brings a passion for helping developers find ways to reduce tedious work, such as project initiation, deployment, testing, and validation, through automation and adopting the latest features and tools in the Java ecosystem. Outside of work, Billy enjoys traveling, playing kickball, and cheering on the Kansas City Chiefs. Billy also organizes the Kansas City Java Users Group. Thank you for doing that. This is a great resource. You can find Billy on Twitter at Billy Korando. Thank you so much for coming out to do this talk. So without further ado, here's Billy.
Hey, how's it going? I hope I didn't get too many boos when Greg mentioned I'm a fan of Kansas City Chiefs. That said, I will want to congratulate all you Denver people on now having the second best quarterback in the AFC West. And so maybe, hopefully Russell Wilson can finally break that streak at some time in the future of, 10 consecutive wins, Matt? I don't know. Can you put it in the comments? I'm losing count at this point. With that said, Matt, if you could, there you go. Great. I have my screen now. Let's go ahead and get there's the booze now from Matt. Let's go and get into his presentation. Thank you for the invite and thank you for that introduction, Greg. As mentioned, my name is Billy Korando, Java developer advocate at Oracle, and you can find me on Twitter at Billy Korando, where I spend way too much of my time. A few quick important notes. Please ask questions at any point in this presentation. If you have a question to ask, definitely ask in the YouTube comments. There's about a 30-second delay in my experience with StreamYard between when you ask between when I say something and when you actually hear it. So there may be a bit of delay, but I will try to answer questions as they come up. So if you want me to go into more depth on something, or if I need to turn off some notifications here on my machine. Okay, there we go. If you want me to go more depth on something or anything like that, please ask questions. I am here to help you learn about what's coming in Java. So definitely do that. Again, reach out. You can DM me at Billy Korando. You can email me, billy.korando@Oracle. And the link to this slide deck is here at my GitHub. So definitely check that out. Actually, I may have to update that here after this presentation as I made a couple of changes to the slide deck. Okay, there we go. If you do also leave, for some reason, I've been having this weird screen tearing issue. So I don't know what's going on with that. I need to get that figured out. But So I'll have to kind of flip back screen back and forth to fix that. But that's neither here or there. So if you do leave with an intense desire to know more from this presentation, you're just vibrating with excitement like Rico here, Johnny Rico, you can go to dev.java where we have some great tutorials and resources inside Java. So that's really great if you kind of want to know about like what's coming next for Java, the OpenJDK development, a great resource there. On YouTube, we post videos. We usually have a new video being posted every week. We have like a newscast, Jeb Cafe, and have some other stuff. So another great resources. And that's at the Inside Java podcast, at the Inside Java, and then also Inside Java newscast. And also mentioned, I also do the weekly Sip of Java on Mondays. So I give like a quick 1 minute video on just various Java topics that I feel like Java developers would be interested to know about. And again, as I mentioned, the Jeb Cafe done by Jose on our team, which is really great. He goes in depth on Jeps, and then he also has been doing some more tutorials and live coding recently as well. So some great resources to learn more. That said, you are here to learn about what's coming JDK 18, as well as kind of what's been happening to the JDK since we're, I think, primarily going to be focusing JDK 11 or later. I can talk a little bit about between JDK 8 and 10, or 8 and 11. Of course, the big changes there is really the module system, which is, one of the everyone's favorite changes to the Java language. But yeah, the agenda, we're going to be looking at first new language features. Then we'll be looking at some of the runtime features. Then we'll get into some of the deprecation removals and just some of the other key changes you want to know about. And then, as Greg mentioned, we'll be going a little bit into the future. Some of the changes are going to be coming to Java a little bit later on. There we go. So new language features. The first one I want to talk about is text blocks, and that was added in Java 15. And you'll see here, I also included JEP in this. Sorry about that. My computer's acting a little funny today. I added what here is JEP 378. And what that stands for is JDK Enhancement Proposal. So whenever there is a somewhat substantial change to the JDK, the Java Development Kit, it gets formalized as what's called a Java JDK Enhancement Proposal. And these are really great resources to kind of go in and understand why a change is being made, the motivation behind it, the history behind it, and then also perhaps like examples of how that change would be used. So here is an example, and you can see them all if you go here to, there we go, OpenJDK Java.net JEPs. And if you go to JEP 0, that just gives you the whole index page. And you can just type in the specific one you're looking for. In this case, 378. And like I said, it'll give you the summary, history, and use seats and all that information as well. That it looks terrible. There you go. But definitely check these out. I'm not going to be able to go into as much depth on each of these features as what can be done in these JEPs. So if there's also a bit more information you want on a feature and stuff like that, definitely check out these the JDK Enhancement Proposal. Yeah, bro. Matt said Russell Wilson has my computer so scared it's acting funky. Yeah, maybe that is what's happening. Oh, that's good. So, text blocks. Why I wanted to start with that first is I think it's a real quality of life enhancement for developers. We've all had times where we're working with JSON, XML, HTML, SQL, so many of these things within our code. Like we have a string, like I have an example here, where we have like a very simple JSON message, and we can kind of understand what's going on here, but this is also a very simple JSON message of just 4 fields, no nesting or anything like that. And it's odious to write, it's difficult to read, and there's a lot of opportunities for bugs. Like if we wanted to have some sort of nesting in here going on, it may be very easy to forget a comma or colon or anything that's, that you need to have proper JSON. It could be also cases when you refactor and change this code. Again, very easy to forget, putting some formatting or something that in, and all of a sudden, your code breaks and it's just annoying. So now we have text blocks. Text blocks, they are encapsulated by a triple quote and a triple quote. So you have a triple quote, you have a new line, and then within this area, formatting is preserved, and the need for doing escaping is greatly relaxed. So here you'll notice we don't have to have any sort of new line characters or tab characters, or we don't have to escape the double quotes here in this. And so that just makes it so much easier to work with. And so if I was to do a system out print of this string, it's going to just look almost exactly what it looks like in here. So then, what it looks like in code is going to match what it's actually going to look like in your actual application and how it's actually interpreted, which is just makes it much easier to work with. I don't want to get to it much in here, but there is a bunch, and this is where you can go back to the JEP on this, on how the white space and formatting is. But right now, how this is with the enclosing triple quote, all this white space here is ignored. So if I was to print it out, it would print this would be the first character printed out within it, with a system out. And so if I was to move this triple quote, 3 spaces to the left, then I would have a 3 spaces of padding here on the left of this message. But a lot of the ignored formatting or the ignored white space is based upon this enclosing triple quote. But that'd be definitely something better to kind of look up. There's also a Programmer's Guide to Text Blocks by Stuart Marks. You can probably Google that as well. That will kind of go into more depth around some of those little particular nuances around the white space handling of text blocks. It's very intuitive, but if you just need to have some of that as well, it's there. Text blocks are fundamentally just normal strings. They're interpreted as a normal string within the compiler. And so with that, you can just treat them like a normal string. Like if I wanted to have a way to pass in values into the string, like here with string formatting, I can just do that super easily with %s and pass those in, or %d for decimals, and so on. So just normal string, you can treat it as a normal string way. Now let's say you want to use a text block, but maybe all the stuff you want to have printed in a single line, or maybe there's just going to be just one line that's just going to be really, really long for some reason. You can ignore the character turn by on the very last character having it be a backslash on it, and then the character turn is ignored. And so if I was to print out this line, it would be all printed out as one single long line. This has to be the last character. There can't be any white space characters after it. Then, it'll just print out this backslash here, like a space, and then, do a character turn. So just make sure this is the last character of the line. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is switch updates. And this is added in JDK or Java 14, and the JEP for it is 361. So we are, again, all familiar with the old colon syntax for a switch statement. And, it works, but again, this is very noisy. We, had to have the case statement or the case label, then we had to have a character turn, and we do that. And then we have to have the break statement because we have fall through update default. So not only is this really noisy, it's also super easy to introduce a bug, because let's say I'm doing some testing or refactoring or whatever, and for case 6 for Friday, I remove the break. I comment it out, or I delete it, or whatever. And all of a sudden now I have a bug to where whenever the case matches for 6 for Friday, it falls through and then also prints out Saturday. So it's just that's something that we talk about verbosity, and I think a lot of times when I hear discussed, it's oh, you just have to type so much to do these things. Yeah, it's a bit annoying, but what's also annoying is both the visual noise to it all, but also the opportunity for bugs, like here with the, you remove a break statement and then all of a sudden you introduce a bug. So to improve upon this is now there is the new arrow syntax to cases. And so here, in this case, this is still a case statement where if it matches on a label, only the code to the right of the arrow is going to be executed. So now we don't have to do any break statements. We don't have to add like a new line or anything. Much tighter, much clearer. Match on case, you're going to print out match on case 1, you're going to print out Sunday. Match on case 2, you're going to print out Monday. It's reads exactly as how the code would actually execute, and there's just much fewer opportunities for accidentally introducing a bug. Also, with the updates to switch is you can now use it as an expression. So here, in this case, if I want to return value from a switch, then I just, if it matches on a case, then I just have a value that to be returned from it. Now, when you're having a switch as an expression, it has to be exhaustive. So in many cases, that means you're going to have a default statement that does whatever default behavior makes sense to it. In this case, I just have it throw an exception because, well, there couldn't be anything outside of this option for the days of the week. Now, there's also, when you're having the arrow syntax, you can also have it execute a block of code like I have here. And if you're doing it as an expression like I have in this case, then you have the new reserved word yield. So yield only makes sense within the context of this code block that will then return a value. And the reason why we have yield instead of return is so it doesn't get confusing. If I have this expression within a method, if we had return here, it could be confusing reading it. Like, is this returning out of the method or is it just the expression? So to make that all clear, it does yield to show the value that's supposed to be coming out of the expression. You can use, or you can, with the colon syntax, use it as an expression as well. And it could look like this, where you just have to have that yield, and you wouldn't need to have a break because obviously that would be the end of this execution for that case as well. So as I mentioned, expressions have to be exhaustive, and in most cases that means you're going to have a default case. But if you, in this example here with an enum, if I have my enum with all the days of the week, and then in my switch expression, I cover all the different days of the week or all the different enums, then I don't need a default label. So, like I said, for right now, through Java 18 and even JDK 19, you're almost always going to need a default case statement. Though we will see later on in the Beyond section how that might be getting improved a little bit into the future as well. And of course, that's also the case here, even with the colon syntax as well. So the colon syntax actually has seen some updates in all of this as well. I don't know if it's really covered in the JEP, but yeah, I had that pointed out by one of my colleagues. It's like, hey, actually, you were kind of missing that when I was initially talking about it. So a big theme going into Java, going into the future, is pattern matching. And the first example of pattern matching to be added to Java is pattern matching for instance of, and that was added in Java 16, JEP 394. So again, another thing we have often all seen as Java developers is where you have some sort of type where you don't know what it is, or it could be one of many different types. And so then you have to have the if, this thing is actually a string. And there may be cases where you always know it's going to be a certain type, but because it's just coming in, you have to do this check because of Java stuff. You do if actually is a string, then okay, I'm going to create a new variable and then cast a string, and then you can do that. This, once again, that visually noisy, and let's just say, I'm sorry, my key is being jumpy. Let's just say also it could be one of many different types. I did not even touch anything and it jumped forward. I have no idea what's going on. Maybe it is Russell Wilson messing with my computer like Matt was suggesting. Hands up. Let's just make sure, if it jumps forward, it's not me. But here in this example, again, a very simple example, it's pretty easy to follow, but like, let's say it could be one of many different types. Oh yeah, you can have many different types where this could start to become very visually confusing to look at. So this is where like the instance of stuff could become much easier and much better to work with. So now we have pattern matching for instance of, and how that works with instance of is you would have your test is saying like, okay, is this actually a string? And if it is, then it's going to be set to this flow scoped or to this pattern variable. And then you can just use it then wherever this is true. But this is like this first example of pattern matching where you have a predicate, the test of what that pattern is. And then that's right, the pattern variable, the variable that's going to be set if that predicate is true. And so this then introduces also another new concept, or if it's not a new concept, at least a concept that's not often covered, of flow scoping. And what that is so we have it when this is true, now my string is set, but this is only in scope wherever the compiler knows for sure this has been set. So here, like, it's available here, and then it's available within this code block, the if statement code block. But once we get out of it, then it's no longer available. It's out of scope, so you would get a compiler error. Here, it's in scope within this evaluation, but then it would be out of scope the second you leave this evaluation statement. So again, it's very intuitive. It makes sense when you're looking at it, but just something that is a new concept to think about. So of course, if you try to do this as an R, well, then that would give an error because for the R to get to the right side of it, well, this would have to be false. It would have to not to be a string. So then obviously you couldn't then reference that variable because it hasn't been set. But it would be available to the right of an AND statement because, of course, this first has to be true before this can be checked. I probably should just remove this, but you can get a little bit weird with it as well. So if I put like a not before this, then the now my string would be available in the else instead of the if. Or if I was to do like a not around this here and then throw an exception, if that's the case, then I could actually have it available outside of the if statement. But, I would never recommend doing this because this would be very confusing to look at, and it's just a bug in waiting. And then most of the time, what you're going to need to do is just have like some sort of variable created that's at the scope you want it to be, and then set it within the if block. All right, so sealed classes. This was added in Java 17, and it's JEPIS 409. So this is, again, something at all of our organizations, we have domain concepts that, we just have. Like there's going to be a limited number of transaction types that can be at your organization, or a limited number, in this case, I have like users. A user could be a guest, they could be a customer, or they could be an admin. There couldn't be any other user types. Right now in Java code, there's not a real good way of modeling that. You can show hierarchies, but there's not a good way of saying these are the only valid user types. You could always have additional user types hanging off of there that could just be added, and there'd be no way of checking it. Now with sealed classes, with sealed hierarchies, there is a way. There is a way for you to say within a class to say only these classes are allowed to extend me. And then from there, these subclasses would then need to say if they're going to be a final class. Like here in this case, like these are what these different outlines mean. Like guest is a final class, nothing can extend off of it. Customer is a non-sealed class, which basically means it's a normal class, which means, maybe you could just have many different types of customers or something like that. So you just want them to always be able to easily be extended. Admin is also a sealed class, and under admin, like there could only be a super admin or a normal admin. So what this looks like in code is like this. So I have like it could be either an abstract class, or you could easily have like a normal class, but I would have like a class. I declare this one as sealed for user, and then user permits admin, customer, or guest to extend off of it, and then no other classes can extend off a user. And then under that, as I mentioned, one of these classes, admin, customer, and guest, they have to declare if they're going to be sealed, final, or non-sealed. Like I said, so sealed, in this case, it continues on to where it says which classes can extend it. Final, that's works the same way it is. Nothing can extend off a final class. And then non-sealed, as I said, basically makes it a normal class. Anything can extend off it. It's just functionally a normal class. You just have to say so within it when you're declaring it. So very useful for modeling these domain concepts. And again, in the Beyond section, we'll see how some of these new concepts are being introduced are also going to be building upon one another in future releases of Java. The last new Java feature language feature I want to talk about is records. I saved it for last, but it's definitely not least. I think it's going to be one of the most important changes to Java since lambdas and strings back in Java 8. Anyways, records were added in Java 16. Its JEP is 395. So, one of the ways I first want to introduce it is there's been several times throughout my career where I've had to do data transformation. And in that data transformation, I would maybe have a lot of sort-list classes where I get data passed in, I need to transform it into a different shape and put it out there to something else. And it would only make sense within that class or maybe that package, but you ended up having to create all these different classes or maybe even within that instance of that method. And, it's annoying. So you have to end up putting all these classes everywhere. And of course, you couldn't really define it within the body of a method because, even a simple class like this person class with this 4 fields, it quickly becomes dozens of lines to actually properly define it. So you have an equals and hash code and toString and all of that, and you lose all meaning within this class. This isn't really legible. And I know this is really small. It's intentionally so. But with records, you can define a class or a data type within a single line. And it becomes super clear. Oh, I have a person and they have some fields of first name, last name, title, Twitter handle, and then I can just kind of work that afterwards. And everything went black. What's going on? Come on. All right. I apologize for my computer being a little weird today. I may have to do a restart or something. All right. But records. So the purpose of records, they're not just addressing verbosity within the language. They are an important concept. They are about transparently modeling of data as data. As I showed with that definition of record of person, you can just look at the definition of it and immediately understand it, the name of it, any fields within it, and all that. And then also a record, the superclass is always going to be record. You can't extend a record, and a record can't be abstract. And as a result, they're implicitly final. Also, a record is silently immutable. All the fields are final. Now, if you had a array list as one of the fields, you could add and remove items from that array list, but you couldn't change it out. You couldn't change that reference to a different list. Also, records can't declare any instance fields. If I was to go into that record and try to add another field to it, that would be a compiler error because, well, then you couldn't look at the definition of a record and understand what it is. So Doug Walter kind of mentioned that Python recently did something similar called data classes. And that kind of brings up a good point. Often perhaps Java is kind of lampooned or criticized for being slow or being and not to say you're critiquing Java here, but people will be like, oh, well, C# did this longer ago, or Python or Ruby or something. And that's true. And that's actually something Brian Getz, the Java language architect, talks about, where he talks about it being the last mover advantage, where we look at these other languages, they experiment something with it, or something like Kotlin as well, which also had some data classes and value types. And to see how it's actually used by the community within that language and learn from that and then implement it into Java as well, if it makes sense. A language might implement some sort of feature that seems really cool, but then maybe no one uses it and it comes with a lot of technical debt. So that often can be the case where Java is a little bit slower to integrate some features, but that's also because we're kind of sitting, looking back and seeing what some of these other languages do and how it is actually being used by the developers of that community. Back to records, though. Also, then the compiler will take that record and will automatically generate accessors, hash code, toString, equals. Like I said, they're all automatically generated, but they can be you can override these implementations, and you can, of course, add your own method definitions. Records are, as also, again, Brian Kitts says, fundamentally just normal classes with just certain constraints on them. Of course, if you override the accessors, the hash code, the toString, equals, well, particularly the hash code and equals, you want to make sure you're still maintaining, the integrity of what those methods are supposed to be doing. Otherwise, again, real big opportunity for bugs if, the equals implementation you write doesn't really do equaling to it. That's just a problem waiting to happen. That's going to pull your hair out later. But yeah, as said, just you can override toString like I have in this example. Or you can add a new method like toJSON, like I have in this example, also using a text block. Like I said, just fundamentally a normal class. So as I kind of also mentioned, some of these features are going to be building upon one another. An example of that is records and sealed classes, where they can be really useful for algebraic types. As I mentioned, records, they can't extend any other class, but they can implement interfaces. And so an example here, I could have like a sealed interface of user, and then I could then have the records of guest, customer, and admin all implement this user. Now, one thing you notice, also, I didn't really touch on it, but sealed interfaces can also be sealed as well. But when I first showed you guys a sealed class, I had the permits clause here. Permits is optional. You don't have to put it in there. If you then define the other classes that are going to be the subclasses of it in the same source file as the sealed class, or the sealed super type, then you don't have to do the permits. And in fact, it would be disallowed here because the compiler is assuming if you define any other classes within the same source file as a sealed class, those are going to be the only classes that can extend it. So permits is actually optional when you in this example. The last new code feature I want to talk about is code snippets for Javadoc, and this is one of the features added in JDK 18, and the JEP for it is 4.13. But yeah, basically it allows your Javadoc to evolve and update its Java documentation without actually having to manually update it. You can put snippets in here. You can also tell it using these @start and then @end comments to say, take this code example and put it into the code, and it does it by comparing the file name and then the region, which just is a simple string matching. So that way, if this code changes, that will update your Javadoc. That's a good way of keeping your documentation always up to date, which is always one of the more difficult things to do, or something that's frequently becomes out of date. Now let's get into some of the new runtime features and improvements. So one of the things I want to talk about, and I think something that's not talked about enough, is CDS, or class data sharing. If anyone wants to comment if they're using CDS, I'll be interested to hear it. But it's a really under talked about feature within Java. So as I mentioned, class data sharing. This is whenever you start up a new JVM, it's going to be loading a bunch of classes. And, a lot of times this is just loading the same stuff over and over again, especially when you're talking about like the same application you're starting up. It's just doing a lot of rework. So way back in JDK 5, we actually first added CDS. And then in JDK 10, they added app CDS, which actually allows this class data sharing to be extended actually into your application code and not just the core Java code or the core Java classes, which allows it to be much more beneficial to developers. So there's a couple of updates done to it. JDK 12 added default archive, which is just having a pre-processed archive for the core Java classes, and JDK 13 added dynamic CDS archive, which really made this much easier to work with for developing a shared archive for your application code. So to use app CDS in your code with the dynamic archive is you would run your application with the JVM archive classes at exit, and then you would give the name of a shared archive and then your application. And then to use that shared archive, you would just say shared archive and then the location for the shared archive, and then it would, and then the whatever it is to start up your Java application. But what's also good is like if it can't read this file or can't be found, like the JVM will just silently ignore it. So it's not like, oh, you can't find it, it's going to crash and fail. But it's a very good way to provide a lot of speed up. I'll get to your question here in just a second, Vishnu. But yeah, you can actually get pretty significant startup. I have an example here, but like I've tried it with like Spring Boot, like their Spring Boot Pet Clinic test app. And I think it like reduced the startup time on like my local laptop machine by about 25%. Like, it went from about 8 seconds for a startup time to about 6 seconds. So it's actually could be pretty substantial. Of course, results will vary depending upon the specifics of your application. If you're connected to a database or some other external service during startup, that's going to take up a lot of time as well. So the benefit might not be as significant. One last thing on CDS is that when it loads this shared archive, it memory maps it. And so if you have multiple JVMs running on the same machine, they will all read from the same location, which could have memory savings with it as well. But that's only for running multiple JVMs on the same machine. All right. So Vishnu asked a question. One question, I apologize for stressing, but could you comment about ways you can measure the number of user-defined classes loaded in JVM when with user-defined, I don't know if there's a way, but what you would really want to use to kind of get into those questions or how you could even really start to dig into that is JDK Flight Recorder. JDK Flight Recorder is a really powerful tool that's actually built into the JDK that can give you really detailed information about what's happening within your JVM, like loaded classes and all that kind of information. And it's actually super lightweight. Like it usually only takes like 1 to 2% overhead. Again, this is going to depend upon what exactly you're profiling and all that kind of stuff. So I can't sit here and say it's going to be that case for everything, but it should be very low overhead so you can actually run it in production and it can give you really detailed information. There's some great information like Mikhail Vitstadt, who is also at Oracle. Like if you just look up JDK Flight Recorder, Mikhail Vitstadt, let's just see. And actually, I may have a presentation here at some point in the future about that. But yeah, if you do that, there's some great presentations on how to use a JDK Flight Recorder that can answer that kind of question for you. I don't know if there's anything that will say user-defined classes versus others, but there could be ways of filtering perhaps by the package name. But great question, and JDK Flight Recorder would probably be the best way of finding that information. Let's see. What is happening with my system? So then another question from Kevin is, for cloud environments, is there a good way to share JSA between containers? Yeah, so you can put it as a volume and just map it to in that way. So yeah, that could be an easy way to share it. I guess another thing also is with the shared archive is the JVM will try to load any classes it recognizes that thing is using. So like, let's say at your organization, you have like a very similar tech stack for all your organizations. Like you're using Spring Boot and Jackson and Apache Tomcat and like these 7 or 8 other libraries. And so really most of the code's all very similar between them as far as their underlying dependencies. In that case, you could actually just make sense, instead of trying to create a new dynamic archive for each different application, is to kind of share that same archive across all those different applications, because the actual code that you write in your application is just like the tip of the iceberg as far as the number of classes are actually being loaded within your actual JVM. So in that case, I'll probably actually recommend saying just using one simple shared archive across instead of a different dynamic archive for each application, though it's pretty low cost to do for each one, other than this kind of overhead of updating it. So Manuz, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. You're saying you used Lombok for just sorting POJOs, and yeah, of course you can still do that. But records provide things that, because they're part of the actual core Java language, that long-block can't do. For example, they can be immutable and have that actually being enforced, which is something that, a long-block class couldn't really do. I guess they could be final, but there are certain advantages that records particularly have over a long-block. Though, of course, if you're using long-block and it's working out great for you, you can continue to use it, but there are some things that records provide that a long-block, just by it being a third party to the JVM language, can't actually provide. If a corrupt CDS file is generated to abrupt shutdown with the JVM, yes. So yeah. So, and that's actually been improved also in JDK 18. There was like a couple of issues where the JVM could crash if a file is corrupted. It's been correct. That's been addressed in JDK 18. But yeah, it's very much a case of if there's something wrong with the CDS file, like it can't find it, there's something wrong with it, or can't match a class or something, it just wants to silently ignore it because it's not necessarily critical, to the startup or something, just to have like a little bit slower startup. So yeah, most of the CDS stuff is based around it's nice to have, but not critical. So there is also a new garbage collector has been added, Z. Generally it's called ZGC, but Z, it doesn't stand for anything. They just, I guess, like Z. I don't know. But it moved out of experimental with JDK 15. Again, JEP 377. It's a fundamental redesign of garbage collection on Java. It's currently a single generation garbage collector, which I won't get into. If you're really into garbage collectors, that will mean something. If you're not, don't worry about it. But it is going to be, they're looking to make it multi-generational at some time in the future. I don't know the specific time on it. So the timeline on that, and even if I did, it can easily change because we know how software development goes. You say it's going to be, done by next month, and then it's like, oh, actually it's going to take a couple more weeks. Well, that's often the case here, even in OpenJDK as well. But the goal of Z is to be also low latency. Like initially when it was released in JDK 15, it was sub 10 milliseconds. Now it's actually with JDK 17, sub 1 millisecond pause times, which makes it really great for web applications where you want to have as little latency as possible so users can get that response back as quick as possible. I think that maybe comes with a bit of cost at overall throughput. So if you're doing some sort of batch application or where you just really care about throughput, GDC might not be as ideal, but again, you should do some testing for that. It's also super scalable up to multiple terabyte heaps. And again, if this interests you, you can just turn the GDC on by this JVM argument, set your heap size. And then if you're, again, testing it out, you can turn on garbage collection debug logging with this JVM argument as well. Let us know what your experience is. I mean, it's out of experimental phase. We trusted its production garbage collector, but, we're still eager to hear back any sort of information on your experience with it. All right. This is another area that's like a great quality of life improvement for Java developers. Helpful null pointer errors. Again, you spend any time as a developer, a year less, and you're going to enter a null pointer error, and it's not going to be clear. It's going to be like null pointer error on main class line 15, and you look at line 15, and like there could be like 10 different things it could be, or maybe not 10, but like 3 or 4 different potential variables where that null could be happening, which then means you have to probably do 2 production deploys, one where you put like that system out just to like, for each of the different variable types that could be null to find out which one's null. And then you implement your fix once you find out what could be null, and then you fix it. Now with helpful null pointer errors, instead of this unhelpful, NPE on line 7, now it'll actually say what variable was actually null. Much easier to deal with. Now you only have that one production deploy when these NPEs happen instead of the 2. So, saves a lot of heartache and frustration that comes with those horrible NPEs. ARM Architecture 64 support is now for all the major operating systems: Linux, Windows, Mac. Mac was the last one with JDK 17. And this is an ongoing thing. Every release of Java, there's going to be more, fixes and updates for ARM Architecture 64 support. I was doing some research on JDK 18 for the JVM, and there's, a whole host of updates and changes and bug fixes for ARM Architecture 64 support. So it should be a big improvement now, and it can continue to be improved even better on into the future. The simple web server, JDK 18, JUP 408. This is particularly more interesting if perhaps you're a teacher of Java or you're a student of Java, where there's always often within classes like, hey, we want to, host some web files or do something like that. And then this would always require going out and downloading some sort of application server. Now there is a very simple web server packaged right within the JDK. You can start it up with the JWeb server, and by default, it will be on the loopback address at port 8000. And from wherever you run this command from, it's going to be serving the files within that directory. It will automatically handle some MIME types. So there's like an HTML file in that directory. It'll be rendered as HTML. Whereas if it's like a Java file, it'll be rendered as text. But a lot of this stuff can be customized as well. You can change the port by the -p variable, the binding address, the directory, and so on as well. But it can also be useful for testing and stuff like that as well. But a lot for education. But if you ever needed like a really simple web server for some neat reason, it's right there now in the JDK. One thing that also isn't talked about as much is how there's always like pretty substantial improvements to the JVM with kind of like every release. And what's really cool is, so here I just did a simple example on my local machine. I really didn't try too hard with it, but I just kind of started up a Java application. And in this case, the Spring Boot Putkinik app at 2.5, that should be .0, not .50. But the exact same binary. I built this with Java 8, and when I started it up on Java 8, it took about 5.25 seconds to start up. And just at least when I did a top, it said it was using 673 megabytes of memory. I think back then, the garbage collector would kind of really be aggressive about grabbing as much memory as possible. But with JDK 17, just again doing Java jar, it took a little under 5 seconds to start up, and it used substantially less memory. Part of this is also, this was using the parallel garbage collector, and this was using G1. I tried it again with JDK 18. It was slightly faster. It did use a little bit more memory, so I'll have to kind of check that out, because there actually should be a pretty substantial memory improvement for JDK 18 as well, but that's not being seen. But usually you should be seeing small improvements with every release of Java. Someone commented like on Twitter at some point, but like for string.formatting, like one of our JVM engineers like improved its throughput by like 3 times. And generally, unless you're doing a lot of string formatting in your code, you're not going to see a benefit from that change. But that can just kind of see how every release there's going to be a number of those changes that are going to be improved. Sometimes it's substantial, like a big improvement to string format, or sometimes it can be small, but that starts to add up with every release to where from JDK 8 released in 2014 and JDK 17 released this year or last year. Last year. You see it produce substantial improvements, and again, this is running the same code. How are you? So I mentioned I just did a top on this. That is like the command line top on Mac OS, and I think it's also on Linux. This is a very, very rough way of measuring it. There's much better tools. I mentioned like JDK Flight Recorder. There's also Java Microbench Harness JMH. There's a lot better tools for really doing in-depth comparison between these languages. And I don't want to get too deep in it, just because, no matter what tests I do, it's also going to be very dependent on my hardware and my operating system and this code I wrote. And it may not be exactly reflective of what you'll see in your code, but there should be non-trivial performance enhancements, particularly if you're going from Java 8 to Java 17 or even Java 11 to Java 17 in these updates. So, and you get this for free. You're not having to necessarily recompile your code to do this, though. If you're going from Java 8 to Java 17, there's probably a decent chance you will need to do that, but you don't have to. So huge improvement from Java 8 to 17, definitely. The last thing I also want to mention is some deprecation removals and other changes to know about. The JDK 17, it deprecated for removal the security manager. Fundamentally, doing this stuff at the operating system level. Okay, I don't know what's happening there. But yeah, fundamentally, this is easier to handle at the operating system level than through Java with a security manager. It just wasn't used that much, and there was a huge technical debt that came with it. So we're removing it because there's just better options out there, and it will allow us to focus on other more important areas for Java developers. The applet API, this was deprecated with JDK 9, and now with JDK 17, it's marked as for removal. Things that have actually outright been removed from the JDK include the Nashorn JavaScript engine. It is still actually being used, and you can actually still find the code under the OpenJDK project on GitHub. And I think there might be a binary out there. If you still want to use it, it's still available. It's just no longer part of the JDK. Also, the clear mark sweep, the CMS garbage collector, that was removed in JDK 14. And fundamentally, the G1 garbage collector, which was made the standard garbage collector with JDK 9, it's just a fundamentally better garbage collector than CMS, so that's why CMS was removed. Some other changes. With JDK 17, the JDK is strongly encapsulated by default. So that kind of goes back to the Java module system that was added. That was a big change that came with JDK 9. Initially, by default, the illegal access permits was a default argument within it, which kind of turned off a lot of the Java module systems as far as the encapsulation concepts are concerned. So JDK 16 removed illegal access permits as a default argument, and now with JDK 17, illegal access permits is a no-op. So this will no longer work. That said, many of the most critical APIs are still available, like Sun, Mist, and Safe, and all these other ones as well. So there shouldn't be too many breaks, but it is there. And if for some reason you do need to get in to a specific module that you can't for reflective access, you can still do adds open at the command line or as within a manifest file within your jar. And eventually illegal access will be removed altogether, which will then, give an error at startup. I covered like features and new things are coming to the JRE or to the JVM and all that stuff. But there's also been a whole lot of other things like new classes, new methods, new fields. I can't possibly cover. We'll be here till 10 o'clock if I try to do all that. But what you can do is if you go to like the Javadoc that we host online here for like JDK 18, you'd be Java Early Access JDK 18. There is now a new tab within that can then actually show you all the changes. And we go back to JDK 11 for this. But it's a really good way, like particularly like the string has had like a whole lot of new helper methods added to it. Stream has also added a lot of stuff as well, but this can be kind of good. Definitely check this out because there could be some new helper methods and new fields and stuff like that could be help solve an issue for you that you may be running into without having to write your own code for it. All right, now we'll get into the beyond section, and I'll try to keep it pretty quick because we're at about the 1 hour mark, and I'm guessing people are going to start getting hungry here pretty soon. So pattern matching for Switch, it's currently in preview 2, and a couple of weeks ago, Brian Getz announced that there's going to be a third round of preview for this as well. There hasn't been a JEP created for that third preview yet. He did kind of outline what the changes are going to look like, but I'm going to wait to actually update that until that actual JEP comes out. So this code isn't going to quite, it's definitely not going to match what it's going to look like in the future. So just to kind of keep that in mind, but I can still kind of cover the basics of what pattern matching for Switch is. One thing I do want to cover, though, is one of the really nice changes to Java since going to the 6-month release cadence was also adding the ability to preview features. And Switch is a really good example of how that preview can be very helpful. You know, when I talked about Switch with the colon syntax early on, one of the biggest frustrations is having to put the break in there, having fall through by default. It's something that had we had this preview functionality and feature before, like there's no way, you know, Switch would have been released with fall through by default, but because we couldn't get that good feedback back from developers, you know, we kind of had to deal with this baggage of, you know, fall through by default for all these years. So it's really nice having this. We can get feedback from developers. We can get features into your hands earlier. We can say like, okay, here's how it could be changed and improved. And we're actually even seeing it here. We're having another preview round for Switch. So that way, even though it would be nice if we had this earlier to be able to use in our code, what we're going to end up with is a much more refined, much better functioning feature in the end for all the years ahead for Java, which, you know, hopefully should be very long. With that said, pattern matching for Switch, this allows you to here, like in this case, we can pattern match on the type of what we're switching upon. In this case, like we have integer I, and this is the pattern matching. If it's an integer, we're going to set it to the variable I, and then that I is going to be in scope to the right of the arrow. In this case, a different variable label is being used in each case, but really I could reuse I in all these examples, or X or Y or whatever, and like have these all be the same, because by it gets down to this next case, it would be out of scope. So, you know, it could also be a little bit easier to read as well if you want to do that. You're not having to think up like all these different variable names for in your switches. Also, within switches, we'll have what's called guarded cases as well. So, okay, if S is a type of triangle, then we can actually then check that value to say like, okay, is its area, if it's 100, well, then it's a large triangle. And this is a lot better than having like a case and then have like an immediate if in there. And then, you know, if it's this, then it's a large, you know, if it's, you know, we're moving this if outside of and putting it actually in the case label. Man, this is driving me nuts. I don't know why that's happening. And then it looks a little bit simpler than for the next case statement. Also, we can now cases can or switches can handle nullability as well. So that can be very nice. Like I said, the syntax is going to be changing a bit. I believe we're going to be adding a when keyword to this. So instead of it being an ampersand, double and here, like it would like an if statement, it would be when or something like that. But like I said, it hasn't been defined within a JEP, so I didn't want to put that in there because it'd just be another kind of wrong. But just to know, this kind of general functionality will be here. The syntax is going to be a little bit different when it's actually delivered in JDK 20 or beyond. I also mentioned earlier about how a lot of these new features are going to be built upon one another. And so here we can see that where pattern matching for Switch can actually understand when a class is sealed. And so this could be really great when you have a sealed hierarchy. You can have a switch on that sealed hierarchy where it knows that only admin, guest, and customer can extend user. So now I don't need a default case if I'm switching on different user types. Of course, I could, you know, for admin, I could have like my super admin and normal admin under here, and then guest and customer as well, because then, again, the compiler would know nothing else could possibly be extending upon it. So like I said, this is just like a good example of how some of these new features are going to be building upon one another. And here also, if we were to add like a new sealed type under user, or if I accidentally deleted this, then this will get a compiler error because it's no longer exhaustive. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. We're kind of getting past time. But there's also record patterns and array patterns. And pretty much what this will do is just make it a lot easier to work with records with like taking values out of them are also arrays, with referring to arrays. Instead of like having to iterate through an array to get to the item you want, you'd be like, I know I just want to get to the first item. I can like directly reference that first element with an array. Or here, like here it's like a record. The only thing I really care about is getting to the color from within like a colored point or whatever in here. Like this one specific deeply nested item, that's the only thing I really care about. And with record patterns, instead of having to put like the deeply nested if statement, I can just directly reference maybe a field within that class to pull, or within that record to pull that value out of it. So that's also one of these ways where there's already a lot of benefit for, say, records, but over time, new things are going to be built upon it that's going to really make it to where it's going to be really easy to get data out of it, put data into it, or I guess not put data into it because it's immutable, but there's a lot of benefits that are going to be coming with records as well on into the future. And yeah, here, like again, with array patterns, it's like being able to directly reference elements within an array without having to, like, say, iterate through it. To get access, you can get access to these early access builds at these links. So for JDK 18, it'll be here. JDK 19 is also already available. We're just only 2 weeks away now from JDK 19 being released. Also, there's Loom, Panama, and Valhalla. These are really big projects that are going to be delivering some important value here. Hopefully in the somewhat near future. It looks like they're all going to really start delivering some stuff over this next year or two, timeline pending, and, some of this stuff will be kind of ongoing things for a while. But each of these will have really important things, but I don't have time to go into to all of them here. And so links to some code examples are all here. Check out the release notes. These can go into a lot of depth about all the changes as well. As I mentioned, I also have my sip of Java, so you can definitely check that out. I cover like a lot of these new features coming out as well. Also, for everyone that's, a lot of people may still be on JDK 8, this is a really great blog article from a now ex-Netflix engineer about how he helped work on some of the projects he's working on Netflix, how they helped upgrade them past JDK 8. And the long and short of it is, it's just a lot of it is just upgrading the versions of Java that are the dependencies that you're on. In some cases, you may have to upgrade to a different dependency because it's no longer updated. But fundamentally, you want to keep your dependencies up to date as much as possible for security reasons. So it's some stuff you should be doing anyways. But really great article if you need to talk to your organization about getting beyond Java 8. All right, with that said, thank you. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. And of course, you can find me at Billy Korando, or email me at billy.korando@oracle.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to bring the team back on here to see if anyone has any questions. I mean, how do we motivate developers to get up to Java 17, let alone 18?
Exactly. I mean, you just want to be on the latest and greatest. You got records, you get like improved performance, text box. I mean, I think that's like all motivation to get up to JDK 17 and JDK 18.
Let me throw out a question I had. Out of all the features, is there one particular one that you found yourself using the most that's just really kind of saved your bacon, if you will, or made life a lot more pleasurable?
I think so much of my work is this POC work. So like I unfortunately don't get quite to use these, features in anger as much anymore. I feel like it'd be between text blocks and records, just going back on my previous experience where those two features could have just saved me so much time. Like there's been so many times where I had to work with like SQL, HTML, JSON in my code, where having a text block just to be able to write that all out as it would look would have been so much better. And then also records, when you're just defining some of those data classes, much easier just to type that out in a single line than, having to do all the typing. I mean, I know IDEs can auto-generate, but records just make it even easier.
Very cool.
Well, it's funny because Pojos are like a big development, right? In the
Yeah.
Java community. I mean, it's been
Mhm.
like what, 8 years now, but we thought that records would solve that, and then turns out JPA doesn't work with records, and we're like, oh man.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, and unfortunately, that's just going to be the case permanently, as far as I know, because JPA depends upon mutability for like updating like the ID field and certain fields like that. And records, as I mentioned, they're immutable. So yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't look like that. However, you could use records as projections within JPA. So if you're just purely doing it as view, as something that send it out. Records can actually work with JPA in that case, but you can't have like an entity type can never be a record, and that's like
Right, and I
probably always yeah.
I have a
if you
question.
ask the purists, they would be like, "That's JPA stinks, right? It's not it's JPA."
Well,
No, I won't say that. I don't want to get it yelled at. Sorry. Go
so
ahead.
close.
Go ahead, Chris. What were you going to say?
I'm just saying, so close. I mean,
Yeah.
that would be wonderful.
So I have a question that's sort of counter to the talk, so please forgive me in advance. For people that can't go to 18, are there shims available for any of these cool features so they can try to use that in the version they're in, or is the whole talk get off that old version and get onto 18? Is that a bad question?
No, not at all. So as far as like backporting the features, yes, some features do get backported and some bugs and fixes do get backported. It's going to depend upon like your specific vendor, what kind of contract you have with that. Now, a lot of the language features like records, like I don't think that's going to get backported to anyone. Like I don't think any vendor is going to take it to where you can actually backport that to where it's going to work on Java 8 or 11 or even. So as far as that kind of stuff goes, no. But like helpful null pointers, that was actually something provided to us by Billsoft. They had it in their version of their the JVM, and they provided to us. So like and I think they've had that for a while now. So like something like that has been available before with Billsoft's distro. But so certain things like that could be backported, but some other things not so much.
And I totally get why. But the null pointers is I've hated that. And it's not just Java, right? I mean, other spaces have just as annoying stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, the shit is called Kotlin. That's great.
Exactly.
Thank you, Matthew.
but I mean, kind of I was talking about earlier where the Java being a last mover advantage is Kotlin. Yeah, they've definitely developed a lot of different ideas that we've obviously listened to and followed, and now it actually incorporated it into the language. Some things we followed, some things we haven't, and some of that's beyond my pay grade or my understanding. I'm just a good haircut. Brian and Mark and Ron and all those people know they know more in their pinky about Java than I do.
So I think for folks like you and me, Billy, that are what I like to call example programmers, right? Like our production is the blog post or the YouTube video that we publish. I think we're interested in Java 18, but for the average developer, like, is there a reason to go to 18 over just 17? Like 17 is a huge milestone for most people. Like, is there really 18 is better? Not so much.
So as far as like say cool new features, 18 doesn't have as much as maybe some do, but eventually 19 and then 20, maybe, and hopefully 20 we could actually have like pattern matching for switch. And so by staying current with that, you can make it much easier to when like some of these other really new cool features that you've been kind of following, when they become no longer preview features. I mean, you could use a preview feature in production if you wanted to, just you would have that risk of something changing. So that could be an advantage of sticking with it, even on the 6-month release cadence. And then another advantage is every release, there's JVM improvements, sometimes small, sometimes large, but they build up. And even between, whether it's a 2-year between LTS cycles or 3 years or whatever it might be, you'd be able to unlock those performance enhancements a little bit earlier than you would otherwise.
So, the theory is the changes are smaller, incremental, and you're less likely to break something now. So it shouldn't be painful like going from 8 to 11.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and that is exactly. Yeah. 8 to 11 is a big jump. 11 to 17 smaller. And yeah, and keeping on it once you're on it, is a bit easier. Now, I understand, that's very difficult for many organizations to, keep up with it. But, there is arguments. It's not just completely like there's even real good arguments, even from the perspective of any kind of enterprise that, having a more efficient JVM to save on resources, especially if you're in the cloud, could be useful if you're reducing memory by 10%, between JDK 17 and JDK 20 on average or something, that can start to add up. Or you having faster startups if you're doing a lot of serverless or stuff like that. So there is real good reason. It's not necessarily, leak code hacker or whatever reasons out there. So great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so we don't have any more questions rolling in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast here. And
okay.
thank you for your time.
Thanks again.
Go Broncos.